Thank you for joining us in Finding God in the world of video games. And the most recent Nintendo Direct was chock full of news and updates on some of our favorite franchises, but the announcement of a full HD remaster of Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword has to be the biggest surprise of them all. While most of us were eagerly anticipating a few new morsels of information on the next chapter of Link's story, Nintendo once again swerved us by dropping this unexpected re-release of the original Zelda game, essentially, in just a few short months. It's coming out in June. And most of the time, I am not thrilled with repetitive releases of the same game over and over and over again. Looking right at you, Skyrim. Pretty sure you've been re-released on every possible platform except the Nokia N-Gage, and it's probably coming. But in the case of Skyward Sword, I think we will all allow it.
You'll allow it? Okay. I know I am one of the many people who missed out on playing this excellent title due to its original release date hitting really late in the life cycle of the Nintendo Wii, and honestly many gamers have just begun to experience the full history of Link, Zelda, and all of Hyrule on the Nintendo Switch through Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I'm still waiting for the Ocarina of Time remake though, personally.
I think we all are.
That'd be nice.
But the original release of Skyward Sword on the Nintendo Wii console served as both the predecessor to the masterpiece that is Breath of the Wild, but it's also a prequel to the entire Zelda franchise. This is technically the very first game in the entire Legend of Zelda series. This origin story tells us everything about where the Master Sword comes from, to the Triforce and the nature of it itself. Those things and more, all those answers are locked inside of this adventure, and it is a journey well worth revisiting. While I certainly don't want the Nintendo Switch to simply become a platform for rehashing all of the old Wii and Wii U games that didn't achieve their full sales potential, at least not in the original incarnation, I also think that making every core title in a franchise as definitive as the Legend of Zelda series, making that accessible to all gamers is definitely a worthy undertaking.
Whether they are remakes such as Link's Awakening or remasters like this specific one, I think we can all agree that having all of Link's adventures under one roof is a good move. Did I mention that I'm still waiting for Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask to be remade?
I think so.
Come on, Nintendo, just take all my money already.
Yeah, I feel like you might have mentioned that a couple of times. Almost every single video we do. But even ones that aren't about Nintendo. But in the gaming industry, resurrections happen all the time. And there's a reason for it. They give a developer the opportunity to cash in a second time on a popular title, or maybe revitalize a dead license by reminding people of an older title's significance. And then there's other times they're just testing the waters to see if the continuation of a franchise would work by releasing a low-budget remake of maybe the first game, and it checks the pulse of the gaming public to see if they're still interested in seeing where the story goes. Many of the games that we enjoy today are just simply improvements on a concept that was originally launched decades ago. They just have a new visual coat of paint, and that kind of obscures the fact that we're essentially playing the same game under a different name. But in our everyday life, resurrections, they're not part of our reality. Death tends to be pretty absolute, and it impacts each of us many times throughout our lifespan. So when God decides to perform a re-release, it's pretty significant, and it certainly warrants a deeper review of the circumstance. So get your headlamps and your magnifying glasses and your shovels ready. It's time to do some digging. So in John 11, we find the reference to the resurrection event that would act as the catalyst for Christ's betrayal and death. Up until this point, Jesus had been a serious annoyance to the religious leaders of the day, but as we see in verse 53, the singular act of raising Lazarus from the dead created a bitter religious rivalry and changed it into a literal death sentence. Look at this. John 11:53 says, "Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death."
So, why did this change everything? It was not the first time that Jesus had performed a significant, publicly displayed supernatural display of his power. As a matter of fact, it was not even the first time he had brought a dead person back to life.
It's true.
So what was different this time? We will have to dig deeper for our answers. Maybe we should start at the beginning and retrace the steps.
It's very sound reasoning. So let's get into this. John chapter 11, very first verse, and we'll go through 1 through 6. There was a certain man who was sick, Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and his sister Martha. This is the Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil, wiped his feet with her hair, and her brother Lazarus was sick. So The sisters sent to Jesus. They sent a message saying, Lord, the one whom you love, they're referring to Lazarus, is sick. So when Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was.
That's what you do.
So we seem to get our answer in verse 4. Jesus plainly says that the purpose of this sickness was not death, but to glorify God. Okay? So as soon as Jesus realizes that his dear friends are in trouble and his follower Lazarus was hurting, he immediately hopped on a plane and went to save him. No, that's not what happened. Okay, let's go back. So he told Peter to go get his fastest fishing boat, and they sailed directly to Lazarus' houses on the Sea of Galilee. No, that's not it either. As soon as Jesus receives the information that the situation is desperate and his services have been requested by some dear friends, he stays 2 more days right where he was at.
That's the right one.
He heard the cry for help. He did understand how serious it was. And then he booked a room at his current hotel for 2 more nights. I mean, that's not the response we would have expected. I mean, most importantly, it's not a response any of us would have wanted. And once Christ finally decided to take that remote in his room and click the checkout button, he revealed to his disciples that he was already painfully aware of the situation they were heading towards. He knew he was going to be far too late to perform a healing. You see that in John 11:14-15. Jesus said to them, the disciples, plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let's go see.
So this is already a lot to process. Jesus finally heads toward Lazarus once the deadline has expired and those who were counting on him had been completely let down. Christ had previously displayed exceptional urgency to provide healing to others, and he had even previously demonstrated his ability to heal from a great distance in Luke 7:1-10.
That's right. I mean, he could have intervened in a variety of ways, and he deliberately chose not to. His previous recorded resurrections in Luke 7:11-17, and then again in Luke 8:40-56, clearly showed he had the power to bring Lazarus back to life. But he chose to wait until Lazarus had been very, very dead. He had been mourned by his family, he was already buried in a tomb, and at this point he had begun the process of decomposition. His situation had gone from hopeless to finished. His story was over and his journey was complete. Jesus' loyal followers had already resigned themselves to this ending and they had accepted it. And that is where the story truly begins.
Earlier we tried to gain insight into why Jesus waited to help his friend, and the blunt response we received was to glorify God. When he explained to his disciples why he was glad that he had not been there to prevent this, he explained very directly that it was so they may believe.
But believe in what? In him? They already did. And as a matter of fact, so did Mary and Martha, the followers that he had let down with his seeming lack of urgent response. If you don't believe me, look in John 11:32. Mary comes to Jesus, falls down at his feet, and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She believed. Both Mary and Martha gave this identical response. They believed in Christ, they believed in his power to stop this death from occurring, and they still called him Lord at this point. This was not a matter of their belief in him, but in what he was actually prepared to do for them. Sure, he had brought other people back to life, and certainly he had displayed miracles of healing and provision beyond comprehension. But it is an entirely different thing to believe that he will bring back to life something precious to us that we have already mourned and accepted as lost forever.
So it's time for the big question. What have you given up on? What has moved far beyond its expiration date and you have already let it go, buried it, and moved on physically, mentally, or even emotionally? What have you stopped believing he would do for you? So you stopped praying for it, you stopped hoping for it, or you even stopped wishing for it? What is so far dead and gone that even though you can still call him Lord, you still love him, you still believe in him, and you still serve him, but you no longer believe he can or will change that situation for you? It's time to move that stone that guards your heart out of the way.
And we'll see that in a real way here in John 11:38 through 44. So Jesus came to the tomb. It was a cave, and there was a stone that was laid against it to act as a door. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of Lazarus, said, "Lord, by this time there is a stench. He has been dead for days." And Jesus turned to her and said, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone from the place where he was lying. Jesus prayed. He said, "Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing around me, I say this, that they may believe that you sent me." And then he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with his grave clothes, and his face was still covered with a cloth. And Jesus said, "Loose him, and let him go." Now there's a beauty in the reality that throughout all of this, Jesus still felt everything. I think that's important for us to stop and look at, even though he already knew how it was going to end. He felt this deeply in his spirit. We see in John 11:33. And then in verse 35, he openly wept. He wasn't untouched by their sorrow and their pain. He felt it all. And then he showed them his power over a situation that they had given up on. And he brought Lazarus back to life, an act that would seal his own fate in the process.
I want to encourage you right now that no matter where you are in your walk with Christ right now, he feels every bit of pain that you have endured. He is not sitting on some golden throne far away from our problems, disconnected from our trauma.
That's right. He has felt it. He has endured it. He cares, and he shares every bit of that burden with us. And his purpose in waiting is not to increase our pain, but to increase our faith. He is not here simply to repeat his old miracles, but to do new ones that are beyond our ability to comprehend. So, I'll ask you a fair question. What is your Skyward Sword that has been relegated to your archives and you decide it's never going to see the light of day again? What is your origin story that you have decided is better off left in the past, discarded, and just moved on from? What miracle have you gotten tired of believing for? What dream have you buried in a tomb? With the Lord, it is never truly over, and your unanswered prayer, your impossible situation, or your dead dream is not the end of the story. Renew your faith in him today, roll away that stone, and allow him to be glorified in your situation. Your story is not over yet, and even your Skyward Sword origin story still has another breath in it if you will believe.